Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Riley Loveland. I'm an associate director at New Buildings Institute. I'm located in Portland, Oregon. I'm in the Southwest Hills up here in the little neighborhood of Maplewood. But I work in schools nationally. I've actually been working in schools my entire career. I've like lived in every state on the West Coast and worked in schools, but then I get to work with schools now all over the United States. My work is really rooted in the sort of like process component of this. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, but I get to tap really smart people to help when that sort of AEC phase comes into a project. But we do a lot of like master planning or technical assistance for schools. And I will talk about that throughout this whole time. I'm kind of curious to know who some folks are. So if you don't mind putting where you are in the chat, who you are, it's helpful because the schools world is really small. So usually I know people on these calls and I actually don't see anybody I know, at least quickly. So also, hello to the people I can see on the screen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this sort of like concept designing healthy, high performance schools in a changing landscape. The changing landscape lens I'm going to use today is a little bit of Oregon, but it's going to trend national too, because like I said, I span from like Oregon to Iowa to Kentucky to Florida. I mean, it's just like a whole wheel. So I'm going to dive into this and we'll have time for questions. Put questions in the chat. I'm going to have some questions for you all. So enjoy the ride. And for anybody that is not familiar with NBI, with New Buildings Institute, we are a nonprofit. We are located in Portland, Oregon, but we have folks all over. I can't remember exactly how many states we're in, but it's a lot. And we do really focus on zero energy, zero carbon, or decarbonization and beyond. And we're really focused. We have like three teams. One team is really deep in the like codes and policy world. One team is really deep in the building innovation, so like technology implementation and things like that. And then I sit on a team that's called the Leadership and Market Development, and we're about taking all those technical concepts out into the world. And then I have a little schools team of 3.5 people within that Leadership and Market Development team. I'm going to do a little like state of our schools to start this out. Also, it's possible that I'll talk about some stuff and you guys are like, yes, yes, I know this, but hold on. I promise there'll be at least something in here for you. At least I hope. If there's not, please give me feedback. So, why schools? I have worked in schools, like I said, for my entire career. I think they're a really compelling building type because they are so focused on the occupant and there's so many, bodies and little humans developing in them. So they're really important. And they also showcase a lot of leadership nationwide. They are among the largest publicly owned building stock in the United States. They have huge portfolios, they have small portfolios, but there's a statistic that 1 in 5 people actually touch or interact with the school every single day. Students are spending 6+ hours a day in them. This amounts to like over 1,000 hours a year. I know that varies from state to state. That is a national average. And then health and comfort directly impact learning outcomes. I know that you all probably have memories of being in a hot classroom, being in a loud classroom, being in a classroom that didn't smell right or didn't have great air, and how that made you feel. I actually feel that in my office right now. I should have probably opened a window before we had this. But the problem is that districts have a lot of competing priorities. A lot of schools in general have a lot of competing priorities. And of course, we see that buildings that were constructed 40 to 60 or more years ago are not designed for today's climate, performance standards, or designed to really house the sensitive bodies that are residing in them during the day. I am such a bleeding heart too, so I might go off on a story tangent, just like if you have questions about them too, or you want more stories, you're welcome to give me feedback in the chat. More stories. Many of you know this, especially if you're in the Portland area or you're in a large metropolitan area or everywhere, that school district portfolios have this like wide range of priorities and the stakeholders are really complicated. And they've got this whole list of like historic injustices that we see, operations and construction and maintenance is significantly underfunded. I will have a stat for you in a second. There's always political opposition, even in an area where we all sort of like drink the same Kool-Aid. There's wildfires, there's extreme weather, and so much more. So with all of that, our infrastructure is really a core component and it's really struggling. Anybody want to put in the chat what they think this car is? This is my favorite. Oh, wait a second. All right, someone nailed it. It is a Cutlass. Okay, so imagine this is what we're driving around in our schools. So this vehicle is what the average school is. Imagine that. This thing, I mean, you can see seat belts in there, but I'm sure they weren't using them. So it's not exactly like the pinnacle of safety. Right now, the schools are assessed at about a D plus grade, and they need $370 billion to address just the deferred maintenance. So that's a huge number, and it seems sort of insurmountable, but there's ways that we all can help move that needle just a little bit by making incremental choices. This one always really gets me. I really love to talk about HVAC. So that the Government Accountability Office reported that approximately 1/3 of schools need to update or replace their HVAC equipment. And that's just like one piece of the pie. I mean, it's like a many tentacled animal, but it is just one piece of the pie. This is a lot of numbers, so I'm sure you'll have slides after this, but so maybe I'll just sort of draw your attention to the fact that 40% of schools don't have a facilities plan or long-term maintenance and upgrades, and that 16% of districts have not assessed their building needs for more than 10 years. That's a lot of people that we need to help move the needle on. There's more stuff in here too. I have so many stats. But we all can work together to help with these building upgrades to help improve air quality, improve the comfort and the health, support better student learning. This isn't on there, but support staff. Staff are a huge component too. I mean, look what they have to deal with on a day to day. Provide significant reductions in school energy bills, help to stabilize utility costs for annual budgeting. We also know that utility costs are like skyrocketing all over the place. So this can help with some of the demand charges too. And then there's also always opportunities for safety and security. And I always have to put the caveat that I am not a security expert, and that is a whole other world, but there is a crossover between energy efficiency and safety and security. I'm just putting this up here because we're going to touch on most of these today when we talk about upgrades to these buildings. This is in the context of the sort of like healthy, efficient schools. So there's energy efficiency, there's renewable energy, there's electrification, there's decarbonization, there's grid integration. I actually don't know if I talk about grid integration today, but we always can. And the materials and embodied carbon. And this is also where I tell you all that I am not an embodied carbon expert, but I know a lot of people that are. So I will say I'm more in the operational since I deal with a lot of the like school district stakeholders. But if you have really detailed questions about embodied carbon, I can get you answers. It just might not be today. But I will say that we have seen a big transition from just efficiency, just the operational carbon, to the sort of like life cycle carbon. I mean, embodied carbon or constructional carbon comes up quite a bit. So here's just sort of like a view of the different stages of, I mean, operational carbon is just like one little slice of a huge pie. Oh, there's a little square. And just for some, in case this is not a familiar concept, this is where I get to be like, people are like, yes, I've heard this before. But in case, embodied carbon is the manufacturing, transport, and installation of construction materials, whereas operational carbon is like the building energy consumption. I love this graphic. Okay, so decarbonization is like at the root of what NBI does, and it just refers to reducing or eliminating carbon emissions associated with buildings. And that can be with low carbon building materials, energy efficient design, transitioning away from fossil fuels, using renewables, etc. I like this graphic for this explanation in case this is new or people are still kind of getting on the boat on this one, that you can see like a typical building is this, it's here, it's connected to the grid, there might be like a mix of renewables on there, fossil fuels, etc., but there's natural gas. An efficient building still has kind of the same, but it's been set up in a way that's more efficient, so good on them. But they're probably still using natural gas, they're pulling from the grid, which has some dirtier fossil fuels on it. Then there's an all-electric building, which is efficient. There's no natural gas, but it is still pulling from the grid, which has fossil fuels and thus is not fully clean. And then there's this beautiful decarbonized building, which is fueled by 100% renewable energy, clean grid energy, which is like the goal for the state of Oregon. We are going to like cross our fingers on that one. And may use things like on-site battery storage, on-site solar, etc. I think this is a great one. I presented this to some middle schoolers the other day, and they were fully on board. But here's the deal. When you work in schools, sometimes the D word is not the best. Decarbonization is a really hard word for schools. I actually got some feedback recently. The word slipped out. I didn't even mean to say it, but when you work in that space, it happens. And a school board member said decarbonization should not be used in this space. It's really hard to measure. You have to break it down a little bit too much. So we use a lot of, and this was even like pre the administration change, but we use a lot of the keywords that are like efficiency, cost savings, health, energy savings, resilience, student outcomes. So I will use decarbonization and maybe electrification a little bit interchangeably today, but know that when I talk to school districts, I almost never use it unless they have specifically pulled it out. I'm curious though, if you all, what other words you use to communicate things like efficiency, decarbonization to schools. So put that stuff in the chat. It helps me throughout this too. Um, we'll start to transition our language. Yeah, greenhouse gas reduction. I like that. We'll start to transition our language a little bit here where these energy efficiency and decarbonization strategies really improve health. That is a big one that has really been that silver lining since COVID, but also has been a through line, even though since I was a kid. So we always think about this. This is from like the Department of Energy, the previous Department of Energy, but maybe the new one likes this too, where these 9 aspects of a healthy building with ventilation, air quality, thermal health, dust, lighting and views, noise, moisture, and safety and security can all be addressed with energy efficiency and decarbonization strategies. Obviously, water can be addressed with water efficiency, but for the purpose of this sort of discussion today, we're sticking in the sort of like energy greenhouse gas emissions realm. This is just to show you that there is a lot of data out there about healthy school buildings. So if you're going to talk to a school district, or if you are a school district on this, I actually didn't look at the full list. There's a lot of data out there to convince stakeholders about the impacts of school buildings on health. Within decarbonization, right, that like third building was the sort of electrified building. So electrification is like a really core strategy. And that we actually focus a lot on that with school districts. Electrification can be an easier sell, especially in places where like their energy is really expensive. Electrification and efficiency is much easier to talk about. We have like pretty cheap electric on this coast, so it's a little, this language always gets a little tricky. But electrification is a really important strategy to address things like failing systems, to adapt to the climate, and then to address any rising costs. And I know there's always a cost trade-off when you may switch to electrification. So for the purpose of today, I'm just going to talk about this more from the efficiency way that like electrification and efficiency go hand in hand. And like I said, electrification is not always guaranteed to be beneficial or cost less. And the approach like really matters and is influenced by a ton of factors, like the timing of things, the pre-planning, the improvements to adjacent systems. Like, oh no, all of a sudden you have to do a huge panel upgrade. That's a lot more money. Or if you're in California, you like trigger an entirely different review from the division of the state architect. Or, there's just occupant facility manager buy-in. There's just all sorts of things. That is the case though for most construction, whether it's electrification or not. So today also we're going to talk a little bit about like planning for this kind of stuff so that electrification can be done in sort of a phased approach. Many of you may know this, but I do like this slide a lot because I like these graphics. But some of the common electrification technologies in schools, it's addressed in the space conditioning and ventilation. So that's your HVAC and your water heating and your kitchen and cooking and your laundry and your transportation. And obviously renewables is an electric thing too, but you're not really electrifying that. That's why that's not on there. So I'm gonna start talking about some trends. Like I said, we work nationally, and so I actually talk to probably like 10 to 20 school districts every single week across the nation. So a lot of these trends, there are other trends that I'm certainly missing from this list, but these are some of the key ones. So federal momentum, even though the feds have pivoted a little bit, there is still momentum left over from before. Like there's still IRA tax credits for ground source geothermal. There's still like sort of a high that like we were up there. We had Renew America schools. We had federal attention on schools. So even though it's not great right now, there was so much attention that there's really a belief that it can still come back. There are still a growing number of states and jurisdictions adopting net zero or all electric new construction requirements. That is really helpful. There's also states that are supporting school districts to do planning or implementation for net zero or decarb. Like Maryland has a bunch of grants for school districts doing decarbonization, Massachusetts as well. So that is really like ramping up. There's also this like shift from like green building is just a premium add-on, let's take it off the table, to it's more of a baseline expectations. It's going in like teachers union contracts, administration, people are bringing it to the table. I had a superintendent the other day ask me, hey, have we done a lighting retrofit? And I was so excited. And of course, there's sort of like state level, jurisdictional level pushes. Decarb is the base of the decision making, but using a different language, I kind of talked about that. I work with like Lincoln Public Schools in Nebraska sometimes, and they the other day were like, we do all of the decarb things, we just don't call it that. They're even addressing their constructional carbon, which is really cool. So they do all of the aspects, they just break them down piece by piece. And there really is an increased focus overall on embodied carbon in addition to the operational carbon. And the best part is there is more of an emergence of district scale planning around electrification and decarb versus this sort of like emergent building level approach. So school districts are realizing they not just around sustainability, but that they need to put these plans, they need to get them set up early, and that helps them save money. That doesn't mean that emergencies don't come up. They come up all the time, but generally this helps adapt quickly when they do come up. And I mentioned this earlier, but post-COVID, indoor air quality has really been elevated as a priority. I've seen a lot of advocacy groups come out around this. Locally, there's some nationally. So it's great to see that we were on a little soapbox about HVAC and IAQ like 10 years ago, and it felt like no one was listening. And now people are listening. Who knew filters got so cool? This is just a little view of, there's many jurisdictions all around the nation that are starting to adopt many of these ordinances and rules and benchmarking and all sorts of stuff. I hope that number is right because I pulled this a while ago. It might even be higher at this point. At NBI, we actually also track these zero energy buildings. We've been doing that for at least 10 years, over a decade. So we maintain a database that does that. And you can sort it by like state, by building type. So schools are in there. But then a subset, my schools team tracks climate school district and like zero energy or efficiency building commitments. So we have a little tracker about that too. There's always more being added. So if you don't see a school district you work with on there and should be added, please definitely email us. The link is on there, and I can drop all these links or follow up so that folks have them after this too. So focusing in on Oregon, since this is the Oregon COTE, I'll talk a little bit about the Oregon decarb landscape from like the buildings and people side and then the policy level side. And for someone who lives in Oregon, I do not do nearly enough work in this state. So I might be missing things, I have to say. But across the board, students are pushing for efficiency and sustainability. The voices are loud and the voices want to help. So, like, and they're interested in things like tracking. I got contacted by a high schooler the other day who wants to set up a benchmarking profile on Energy Star Portfolio Manager for her school. We're also like generally relatively mild. We are not like Minnesota, for example. So it's a little bit easier for us to achieve some performance targets. And much like many places, we do have an aging building stock. So there's this huge need. There's also the like complementary need of we need air conditioning in buildings like ASAP because our climate is changing. It's getting warmer. More school days are closing for heat. We're obviously not the only ones, but that is certainly present in many folks' mind. Also, our schools need some more resiliency infrastructure to be able to adapt to things like, I don't know if any of you all were in the Portland area a couple of years ago when we had that ice storm that closed down several schools. When we have to do those things like air conditioning or think about our infrastructure or address an emergency situation, it is a great opportunity for decarbonization and efficiency. And so we try and talk to school districts about using those opportunities as one to start digging in. Also, Oregon's timber industry is an advantage since we have mass timber as a natural sort of local, low carbon fit. And I'm not a mass timber expert, but I do have one in my immediate vicinity if we need to talk to somebody. And then there's sort of the policy and program landscape. And that's, Oregon has these statewide carbon reduction goals and our clean energy vision, which talks about electrifying our grid and all sorts of stuff. I should have that on there, but it's like HB 121 or something like that. We also have an energy efficiency specialty code that requires some more high efficiency work in commercial buildings. And was really cool to me, not that codes aren't cool, but the Oregon School Board Association really encourages sustainability policy adoption and talks about it. So like they put stuff on their website about when school districts adopt an energy policy and things like that. So that is a really unique thing that we have in this state. Obviously, we have the Oregon Department of Energy has K-12 technical assistance and grant programs. We have local utilities that offer incentives that are aligned with decarbonization or electrification. We have the Energy Trust of Oregon. We're like super lucky to have that. And they have a new buildings program. They also have an existing buildings program and they have incentives. And we also in the Portland area have the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And that's a little bit different how that's dictated, but it is an asset. So I'm putting that in there in the like, check, good job. The one thing, because this was like all good things, is that we do have state level underinvestment in our school infrastructure. We are one of the states that has the lowest amount of per student capital construction funding in the United States. And there's a great report about that in the America's Report Card that I can also drop in the chat at some point. It's always hard to see that because it's like, oh, our state could do it. Um, it's complicated to navigate the policy and the code landscape, especially for school districts. I also do a lot of work in California, and that code and policy landscape is also really complicated. So you folks on the call and all of the folks in the AEC world are really crucial for school districts to help understand what they need to do and future proof. So that's why I bolded that, is like, you all can help align design decisions with where codes obviously are. That's like what you got to do, but also where they're going. So we really want to talk about future proofing. So like with school districts, we want them to think about solar and storage, getting ready, getting solar ready, things like that. And designers and all y'all can use policy as a strategic tool as opposed to a compliance hurdle. So what I mean by that is when I go talk to school districts, I say like, oh, we need to do this thing, but guess what? If we do that now, there's an incentive that aligns with it. That incentive might not happen down the road. So there's a great way to kind of mix the messaging about why it's so important to comply and then even move beyond. Again, incentives as a proactive design alignment tool. You all also can be a really crucial policy translator for school and district school board clients. You can say, of course, to them that like energy codes are a certain way, so we have to do it. But talking to them about like why people have put this policy in place, why it's important, the impacts it can have on like, again, health and thermal comfort and all of the things is like really what we need you all to help us with. I know it's tricky though to sometimes help navigate the gaps or the lags between school district priorities and state or federal requirements or code. That can be a really complicated conversation. But again, you can emphasize like, well, we needed more high efficiency HVAC out of you. So like that can really help with thermal comfort, indoor air quality, et cetera. And if you're ever, I will say, if you're ever struggling in those conversations, my whole job is to be the like third party when there is some sort of communication breakdown, whether that's between a school district and a school board, whether that's between an energy services company in a school. So if you need help, I'm here. Additionally, Buy Clean Oregon and the emergent low carbon procurement policies for public buildings are something to navigate, but are also great to have because, compared to say operational carbon, like I said, embodied carbon is relatively nascent. So it's good to have something to point to that's like, all right, here's basically a checklist. But the key to communicating this and saying like, it's okay, we can do this. This is why we're doing this, is showing how others are doing it. So like other school districts in the nation and other school districts in Oregon are moving beyond code or have put it into policy that they really want to achieve XYZ. We also recommend they use specific design documents, like their technical specs or their owner's project requirements to help sort of codify that in their own design practices so that they don't have to, go back to a designer each time. It becomes part of the culture. Okay, I'm gonna jump back for a second to what I said earlier about district level planning. So I had mentioned that district level planning is starting to become a priority. That doesn't mean everybody's doing it, but there is some level of district level planning. And this is not just like a capital improvement plan. This is like a really thought through, like Portland Public Schools put together the Portland Public Schools decarbonization plan. And I will talk about that later. I got to be a part of that one. But it's talking to school districts. So if, let's say, you get pulled into a project that is just a building, that is a great opportunity to talk to school districts about managing this changing codes or policy landscape or just changing landscape with technology and using this like long-term portfolio of thinking to do so. Even though you're working on one project, like let's think about the portfolio and how you can phase these different things. Some of the key documents that you can talk to them about are like any facility conditions assessments, if they have energy audits. Isn't that a nice school in Hood River? Look at, I think it even, no, never mind. I was going to say, I think there's a good citation at the bottom. energy audits and emissions inventories, capital improvement plans, bond planning. That's not exhaustive, but those are really good documents to talk and see what they have, just so they have more background for how they can do their portfolio thinking. And when you're having these discussions, if it's just one building, sometimes you don't get the full district level team involved. So talking to them to say, like, can we bring in school boards, facilities team, the school board, larger facilities team, finance departments, and other people from the community to take this school as a stepping off point for a phased approach. And like I said, one example is creating a district decarbonization roadmap. So let's say you're working with a district, you want to talk about this roadmap planning. This is what we do in our sort of like full-time jobs, is try and get these school districts to develop policies and develop roadmaps so that they do have this long-term phased approach to decarbonization, electrification, et cetera. So this is the general high-level process. There are many steps underneath this, but like there's engaging stakeholders, there's assessing the building stock. So that's kind of what I was talking about with some of those documents, setting some goals, and I'll talk about that in a little bit because it is important. Aligning with the building life cycle events, things that might already be happening or things that could happen. Re-engaging occupants or keeping them engaged, educating students, etc., and then tracking and reporting progress. And that should be a continuous wheel. So when we think about road mapping, we think of it in terms of these sort of like building upgrade scenarios, because you want to create a roadmap that addresses the different scenarios that a school district might run into. I highlighted emergency replacement because if we are proactive, we won't entirely avoid them because they happen anyway, like if a tree goes through a school, but it does help set up the process so we know how to react in a smart, efficient, and hopefully cost-effective way when that does happen. The other way we think about, or the other sort of scenarios that we think about in road mapping, is deferred maintenance, plan, routine capital improvement. That's sort of like systems upgrades. That's like the easier ones. They ideally have minimal upfront costs. It's not too invasive in the installation. You can put some planning in there. There's also more of like the retrofit scenario, which is sort of energy efficiency and cost savings projects. That might also be like a suite of projects, like it could be a couple of systems. And then there's the bigger stuff, the like modernizations, there's the additions to existing buildings. So the visual of that is this. I did not put new construction on the scenarios because that one feels like the easy pathway. So we're talking about the harder ones. But basically, you see that all of these roads, system replacement, retrofits, new construction, and major modernization all help get to this portfolio-wide decarbonization approach. And here's some of the goals that they get set. If it's energy consumption, or if it's emissions or energy use intensity, whatever floats their boat. But setting these real goals to eventually be a fully electrified or decarbonized portfolio, and how all of these roads lead together on their little road trip. So this is where I start to get on the soapbox, and I like call to you all to help us all, because it's going to take all of us to help all these school districts plan. So this is sometimes the hardest part, and why I mentioned I get pulled in as a third party a lot, is designers, you all must help districts articulate what they want before designing it. And what that often means is a lot of listening and repeating, and listen and repeat. And you can use things like visioning workshops, or like showing how other peer districts are doing it to show that you kind of understand. You could potentially do some scenario modeling. I'm sorry that got cut off at the bottom a little bit, but really it's all about listening and sort of reframing, and then reframing some of the energy and carbon goals that you might be thinking they should work towards, or maybe you've heard, in a language that the boards and the communities understand and can champion beyond you. That's the key, is give them the language so that you don't have to talk to everybody. And then always, that by doing that, you can connect the building decisions back to the educational outcomes. Like, we build the buildings for the kids and the outcomes, not to like stand as a building. They're pretty most of the time, but that's not what they're for. We do have this document, the key messages for communicating about carbon neutral schools. That is a good one that has some of this key messaging if you're sort of just getting started with folks, to frame how this looks and how the outcomes might look. But regardless, when you're listening, you're sort of trying to listen to what their language is. And I will tell you a very quick story, that I was working with a school district in Maryland recently, and their school district uses a basis of design document to do all of their construction. And they asked for support to like update it, put some sustainability in there. And I was like kind of not getting it because their basis of design document in my mind was a little bit more like an owner's project requirement. And if anybody here is just a big old nerd about documents, you might understand sort of the nuances, but like I wasn't listening to their language. We had to sit and sort of work through the document and then understand what it was they were talking about and what they wanted. So their language is critical. Sometimes I like write down exactly what they say and then sort of dissect it. That really helps me a lot too. And that helps me then to help them set measurable targets like energy use intensities or percent reduction or cost savings or whatever is important to them. Because, you know, if I write down what they said in a meeting and they say cost savings or a life cycle cost 22 times, then I know that that's a priority. You can do this too. You can set some of their goals and talk about like how they want to incorporate the district priorities and goals, making sure that you align it with key life cycle leverage points. And I'll show you my little slides about that in a second if that doesn't make sense. But really, it's just like stakeholder ready storytelling. It's turning this technical data, these technical goals, and all this stuff into things that they, again, can take outside and start talking about so that the project becomes a reality. One of the things that I run into a lot too is I want to communicate that being sort of honest and reconciling from the vision what is actually achievable on a certain timeline is like so critical. And I know things change, priorities change, things change, but like being honest up from the get-go and really trying to reconcile that in between is so critical. I will often hear people overpromise or the school district over asks. There's a way to come in there, so it can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but just being honest up front and reconciling where you think you can get to, I think is crucial. And then, of course, setting up some regular and dependable check-in points. And that could be like design-related check-in points. That could just be like, I have a standing meeting with the school district every 2 weeks. And like this woman, Dawn, knows that I will be there at 2 p.m. on Fridays for her every other Friday. And that's what she needs. So when I said life cycle leverage points, this is what I want to make sure it gets aligned. So these are not fully inclusive, but we've got like major renovation is roughly every 30 to 50 years, hopefully. An HVAC replacement might be every 15 to 20. Maybe it's longer. That's ideal, but we can be realistic too. A lighting retrofit maybe every 5 to 7 years. Again, being realistic. But then there's all these other things that play into this, like bond measures pop into this, stakeholder turnover. I work with a bunch of school districts that have a lot of board stuff happen. And sort of every time something happens and there's a full board turnover, it is a huge opportunity for improvement. We just hit one of those like today, and I'm super excited about it. There's like a new HVAC that I think is on the way. So one of the ways too that I'm sort of putting this second, even though I talked about priority planning. So let's just think about it this way, that school districts need help putting together these portfolio plans. And like, I know we're all for profits trying to make money in theory. So it's like a little hard to do that unless it's scoped, but there are ways to intervene early. And this is where I'm sort of going with this, is that you all can establish relationships with school districts, even if it's not like part of an RFP or something like that, by helping them do things like energy audits or get some of that early data. Energy audits are often like free from utilities. Obviously, Energy Trust exists in this state. So just helping them access those is a really great way to build a rapport and a relationship so that some of that work around like visioning and whatnot comes easier later. You're also more primed to potentially respond to an RFP if you know the folks. A lot of them also need help benchmarking energy use and documenting their building system. Sometimes that is in the form of an RFP, and that's great, but sometimes you just need to maybe like connect with them and get to know them and help them document some of that stuff. I love doing that. It's a really fun way to just get to know folks. You can also do some early work to just look at some of the data and help them make some early plans or make some early priority lists around what they might want to address first, because efficiency and these building tune-ups can help reduce energy needs down the road and save money and time so that when they go after the bigger stuff, everyone is ready. And that can be little things like air sealing, weather stripping, draft stoppers, window film. I mean, the list is not endless, but it's fairly long for some of these low-hanging fruit. But that really helps lead to these bigger next steps where you can prioritize the bigger buildings and the bigger projects. And again, you've established this rapport and this relationship, and it's great. I would be remiss if I did not talk about the loading order here because I'm about to go into the like design strategies, but the low hanging fruit seemed appropriate to put this after that. Many of you may know this, but I always like to talk about it because I'm always surprised at how many people haven't really thought about this. That, loading order is considering comfort and health first. We're really thinking about that. That is like number one priority: thermal, acoustic, lighting, views. So we really start when we're doing these projects with load reduction via efficiency measures. It's the like your efficiency vegetables. I'm sure most of you have heard that. I did not come up with that. I cannot take credit for that. And then looking for additional load reduction using mechanical system selection and decisions with other equipment. So you've already reduced your load, your HVAC might be smaller, and you're good to go. And then you get your renewable desserts, your like EVs, your PV, and other renewables. So keep that one in mind. It's a little bit of a funny slide to have in here because it doesn't exactly fit, but I did want to make sure that it was addressed before we go into the systems. Because, we're talking about you establish some rapport, you help them plan, you've done some early efficiency work with them, but now we get to move into the like, there's a big project on the horizon. And these are sort of the three main building elements that we're thinking about. This is that loading order bit, right? There's the building envelope that passively impacts building energy consumption. There's the building systems, which is the magnitude of like the total amount of energy and greenhouse gas emissions. Then there's also the fun stuff. That's the like renewable desserts, right? That's like the on-site energy generation and etc. Just to show some of the systems that fall under that, just in case. Building envelope is obviously the roofs and the walls, the foundation, windows, and the doors. And then building system is your HVAC, your water heating, plug and process loads, etc. Um, I'll hit on a couple of these. This is not going to be an exhaustive like design meeting. So if you want to talk about more strategies, that is great. We can do it certainly on another time. But I wanted to hit on this envelope and the passive systems, especially first, because I think it's so important. And some of them fall under that low cost with the like weather stripping and stuff. But high performance insulation is key. That helps reduce the overall load. Air sealing and thermal bridging mitigation, air tightness testing. You will see me bold stuff that is very important. Commissioning is clutch. Also making sure that the commissioning agent is not the same person who did the work. We've been running into that with a lot of schools recently, and some of the commissioning really fell apart. Balancing daylighting benefits versus solar gain, especially in our climate zone or in even sunnier climate zones. Passive solar orientation and design and natural ventilation where applicable. There's actually some really great examples of that in this state. The Oregon Episcopal School is one of them. It's just right over here by me in the Southwest. But then really using whole building energy modeling as the design tool. And I try to get school districts to write that into every RFP and every design document. So I think it's really important. And if it's not brought to you by the school district, I highly recommend saying, how about an energy model? And then moving from the passive to the mechanical, that's the second part I was talking about earlier with the building strategies. Heat pumps are great. They are a mature technology. They are school proven. They're all climate capable. There are cold climate heat pumps. Dedicated outdoor air systems, DOAS with energy recovery. There's obviously VRS systems. Although I hear from a lot of people that VRF is dead to them and their facility managers, and that is tricky. But I totally get it. But there is, the hydronic approach too, especially with like refrigerants and where they might be going. There are different options there. Demand control ventilation and real-time CO2 monitoring is great too. That is such a clutch one for making sure that the indoor air quality is at that place where our students can still learn and think and do all of those things. I put domestic hot water electrification and sizing in here because one of the funny things we run into is that, a lot of these older schools, the gyms were used and the like locker rooms were used for real showers a long time ago. And they're, even if the showers themselves are removed, sometimes there's these giant hot water heaters that get left and they're just reheating constantly. So paying attention to sizing is a really interesting one. Downsizing, obviously, in that case. Kitchen electrification and how to bring food service teams along in the process. I'm actually right now working on a big checklist for that whole process of like kitchen electrification. So stay tuned for that. That should come out in the next month or so. And then just a quick nod to just sort of backup and resilience planning, thinking about solar and storage, especially when you're getting into thinking about some of the technologies. And I would be remiss if I did not mention indoor air quality. And I did want to draw attention to like a really specific case study. We mentioned the shift in expectations since COVID. ASHRAE 62.1 sets those minimum ventilation rates. MERV filters, air change rates, CO2 targets. There's all great ways to and how to manage these different things in existing buildings. I know could be tricky. Like you don't want to put like a MERV 13 in an older system, but there are ways to do it, or there's different ways to sort of bring in other systems that can manage the indoor air quality. Electrification is a win here if that's an option because it removes the combustion byproducts, which so IAQ and decarb meet and become best friends. But I wanted to point out the IAQ dashboards here. So this is tricky because if you start telling people that there's high CO2 in your schools, there can be some feelings. But Boston Public Schools has this great IAQ dashboard. And this woman, Catherine Walsh, is incredible and did a really good rollout of this. She addressed community issues. Like, this is a star example of how you might do something like an indoor air quality dashboard. And overall, it's been a great process and it really united the community. So I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people that IAQ dashboards are like the thing they should focus on. But if it comes up in conversation, there's a great example. And this woman, Catherine, is like so willing to talk about it. And of course, when you have the opportunity to focus on HVAC, it's a win for the indoor air quality and thermal comfort at the same time. Okay, I mentioned I'm not an embodied carbon expert, so here we go on this one. But I do really like this graphic it shows that so much of the embodied carbon in a typical school comes from the structure. And many of you are probably like, well, duh. But until I saw it, it did not strike me how much of it was. But as operational carbon, shrinks, you really start to see that embodied carbon becomes a significant portion of the carbon that's going into the atmosphere. There's different ways to manage it: low carbon concrete, mass timber, low global warming potential insulation options. There are different opportunities here. EPDs, or environmental product declarations, are good for specifying carbon performance in schools. And I know that balancing embodied carbon reduction targets with the reality of school project budgets can be difficult. So we're all just trying our best here, but it is something to certainly bring up, especially because Buy Clean Oregon exists. And early design decisions, this is that pre-planning thing, have the greatest impact on embodied carbon. So acting in schematic design is that's the way to sort of have this and make it as cost effective as possible. Okay, key takeaways. Building energy efficiency and removal of fossil fuels enhances the educational environment and mitigates climate impacts. Decarbonizing, electrifying, et cetera, existing schools and new schools is not always a one-size-fits-all endeavor. It requires consideration, local context, resources, long-term goals. If you need support in a school district, either plan or just a one school project, I'm always here to help. Planning for life cycle events like those little loopies I showed you and incorporating electrification strategies into routine capital improvements does really help minimize cost. Like pre-planning is, there's one thing you take away, it's think early. Focusing on energy efficiency is your first stop. That's that little efficiency vegetables. And then you can couple it with sort of everything else. That's really how I get in the door in a lot of school districts. Like I talked to a teeny tiny district in Michigan, Onaway, Michigan, and we talked about low hanging fruit and energy efficiency. And now we're really trending towards a bigger project. Collaborating across disciplines. I know there's a couple of disciplines on here today. Mechanical engineers, energy modelers, contractors, utilities, everybody has a role to play. And you all, as designers, have this really critical role to help facilitate the transition with schools. So I just ask you to listen, respond, and support them. And again, if you need help, I am here too. I have a couple of case studies. I know I'm a little maybe short on time, so I will do these pretty quickly, and then we can go to the Q&A part. I did really want to call this out. Is that okay, Elisa?
Yeah, I would say you have plenty of time if you want to dive in. We have it's 4:48, but we also haven't had any questions in the chat yet, so feel free.
You guys just want to listen to me talk for another 15 minutes? Because challenge accepted.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'll talk about the Portland Public Schools roadmap because I got to be on a really great team, including PAE engineers, Amoresco, and O Planning and Design on this one. And we spent a year putting this together based on this policy. I have been part of this climate policy work in Portland Public Schools since I moved here. Like truly, like the week I moved here, it was like, let's go and do this. So here's just an example of sort of the decarb commitment that's in that policy in case anybody is not familiar. This was heavily driven by the students. It's so well adopted and loved. But we did this roadmap, and one of the key components of it, the first component, besides pulling together all the data, there's a lot of data, and I did not include the slide with the data, but I will show you where to find it if you're interested. I wanted to talk about stakeholder engagement because we did some in-person and some virtual events. We did these surveys because we wanted to know, related to decarbonization, if people wanted us to start to take, funds that were allocated for construction capital upgrades and upgrade a few schools all at once, or do small incremental improvements across all schools. And it wasn't a huge difference. I mean, obviously, incremental improvements across all schools was the highest percent, but I really thought it would be like night and day. So I think that's really interesting. Some folks wanted a hybrid, which I think ends up just being incremental improvements, but I think that that is a really compelling data point for folks, and also really speaks to the like portfolio level planning. We also asked people what their project priorities were related to decarb, and improving thermal comfort was number one. Reducing energy and carbon emissions was two, and I was actually pretty shocked by that. I thought that was going to be last. Improving indoor air quality was third. Energy resilience. We actually did this sort of on the heels of that ice storm here, so I think that that one was higher than it typically would have been. Reducing cost and maintenance costs, improving the outdoor environment, which is sort of like our impact, I think, on overall emissions, and then improving visual comfort. So I think this is really interesting data and really helped us inform our next steps. So the too long didn't read of this one is that we took like a ton of data, put it in this giant spreadsheet, and you kind of like shake it up like a magic hat. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And it gives us an output of what Portland Public Schools needs to do for the next until 2050, because that's what their goal is set for, to decarbonize the portfolio. This is just a graphic of what the total emissions would look like so we did this also by high school cluster. So these are the high schools on the right hand side for anybody not familiar. So this is how we saw the emissions reducing over time from each cluster based on different actions in the roadmap. So the roadmap actually talks about different and specific measures that should be implemented at each school at specific strategic times to decarbonize. And it actually got put into a tool so that the district can take that tool and be like, okay, these 6 projects are already in process. Oh no, we had this emergency thing, we have to put this in. And so that the outputs will change based on what is real and what is happening. There's also cost data in there, which, changes so fast that it's in there, but that may change over time. So this was really cool. This was a really fun project. I encourage all of you to go find out more. We actually made these cute 3 little videos about it. So you can check them out on the PPS Energy and Sustainability YouTube. They're not very long. They're only like a couple minutes long. So go check it out. The slide deck and other things with more information about the roadmap and its outcomes is at this site. There's also a webinar. I'm pretty sure that webinar is on there. Just sort of also speaking to PPS, since we're on that, this is one of my favorite stories to tell people, because this is a little bit like accidental intentional electrification, where this middle school was shut down for years. They had to do a full rebuild instead of an abatement. And then they chose not to include a natural gas system, and it actually ended up saving them close to $1 million by choosing to go all electric. That's a win in my book. I know it's new construction, which is arguably easier, but it's still a big deal because they did have to take down an existing structure and manage the site. The community is kind of a sensitive one. This had been closed for a long time, so this is a great example. One other Oregon project is we've been doing this. It's called MOVER, Microgrid Opportunities, Vehicles Enhancing Resiliency. And it is electrifying Hood River County School District fleet, creating a resilient microgrid using the electric school bus to power it. There's a student and curriculum component and sharing some learnings. And this has so many partners involved and has so many different funding streams, but it's been a long-term thing at NBI. Actually, my colleague Joe is the one that heads this one up, which is awesome. And right now, just for some status updates, actually, if you sign on to our newsletter, Joe puts in updates about this with some frequency. They got an electric van. They got these level 2 chargers. They got the school bus last year. We've been around a few times to talk to the students about their bus. We're going to talk to them now about actually putting in an HVAC as a side project. It's very exciting. So this is all in Hood River, which is a rural school district for anybody who's not familiar. And one last case study, Dufur School District out in Eastern Oregon. This is a teeny tiny one. This is 280 students. They are heavily impacted by smoke and inversion layers. This is not a construction one. I wanted to put this one in here because they were selected as one of 10 districts nationally for this grant, focused on indoor air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, which shows that anyone, IAQ and greenhouse gas emissions impact everyone and anyone. So their grant means that they're in process of adopting a formal IAQ policy. They have been really creative about how they stack or braid their funding. They've got seismic grants and state grants, some ODO funding to do these efficiency projects. Like they use the seismic grant to upgrade the roof and some insulation so that they can have a more efficient building. It's a win-win. And a big lesson learned out of this one is just that sustained leadership and like strategic funding stacking can really position anyone, especially a small district, small rural district, as a national model. And I love that story. And this one is really highlighted by the school board administration here, or the school board association, like I mentioned earlier, they're all about this. Quick resources. I run this program. It's called the HVAC Change Lab. We have 12 plus school districts. We actually have more than when I put this map up here now. And we're working with these school districts around HVAC implementation for the next year. If you'd like to find out more, let me know. Let's talk about it. We have a whole little website of it, but it did combine the Center for Green Schools and the National Center on School Infrastructure, and we are all doing this together. NBI has some resources. I kind of highlighted these throughout. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. We have a whole decarb roadmap guide with templates for school districts. We actually also have the building electrification technology roadmap for schools, which has this cool tool where you can like plug in the building size and the project type and your building type, and it kind of gives you some cost estimates. It's very cool. And then if you're working with school districts and they need help, or if you need help yourself on some of this type of work, you can email our school's help desk. We respond very quickly. I will tell you that because it's mostly me and my 2 other colleagues that are just like waiting and excited. So schools@newbuildings.org is how you contact us there, or you can just email me directly. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Riley. This is fantastic. There is one question in the chat if you have time for it.
Yeah.
And it is, have you worked on schools and other facilities with swimming pools, and can you describe some of your strategies with energy efficiency with these facilities?
Yeah, this is so hard. So recently we got contacted by a school in Minnesota about this because obviously it's very cold there and they have an indoor pool. They're looking into a heat pump for it. The project has not moved very far yet. It's just an early design, so that's totally feasible. There are examples of heat pumps being used to heat pools. There is not a lot out there around energy efficiency in pools. What we keep running into with folks, though, is actually just benchmarking how much energy they're using is like a huge first step. A lot of folks don't necessarily even know where that is. So that's always step one, is sort of figuring out how much energy it's actually using and the systems. But generally, there are all electric technologies that can be used. I wish I had like a real concrete example, but they're definitely starting to pop up more.
Great. Are there any other questions from the group?
It's like 5 p.m., so everyone's like, it's happy hour.
Yeah. I think so. Well, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Alyssa, I could send you some more information that we sent to our school in Minnesota if you want to email me. I'll put my email in the chat about pools.
And I want to remind everyone, because this was a lot of information, we did record it and it will be available on our YouTube channel.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks everyone for logging on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me and listen to me talk for an hour.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.